As I was just so wonderfully introduced, my name is Kathryn Grayson Nanz. I'm a developer advocate at Progress Software. And as a developer with a design background, I've often ended up in jobs and situations where I get to do a little bit of everything, to the point where saying that I've worn a lot of hats starts to feel like a bit of an understatement. But honestly, I really enjoy that type of work. In one such previous job, I was one of 2 designers on the team. There was one full-time designer, and then myself splitting my time between design and development. And that company was a startup. They had a really great app idea that they'd built, they'd proven, they'd gained a group of really loyal customers. However, that app was built entirely by developers without really having any design input, and the poor user experience was starting to become a bit of an impediment to growing the customer base. As new tasks were getting assigned and discussed, we quickly kind of discovered an issue. We weren't talking to the users at all. We had this hyper focus on adding new features and on growing the functionality of the application, but we didn't have any actual data suggesting that people wanted the features that we were building. Meanwhile, users were really struggling to use the features that were already there due to the complex and kind of unintuitive user interface. Our meetings often included phrases like, well, we think, or assuming that, or hopefully. We were making lots of educated guesses about our users, but we just didn't know for sure. We needed to close the loop, but we didn't have any UX specialists, and we were working with a startup budget. I happen to have a little experience from helping run usability tests at past jobs, but those were larger, more experienced programs where I wasn't in a leadership position. And yet, as I've learned over and over throughout the course of my career, expertise is relative. And relative to the rest of my team, I was the one who knew the most about what a usability testing program looked like. And if this was something that we felt strongly about as a team, and it was, we decided that that was just gonna have to be enough. We'd combine our limited experience with research, and we'd figure it out as we went, and we'd find a way to make it happen. And spoiler alert, we did. The idea of usability testing is one that most people will go ahead and agree with, right? They're generally supportive. However, for many companies, making conversations with real users actually happen can be the challenge. And when this happens, we often think it's due to kind of a lack of understanding about the importance of user testing, and that the problem we actually need to solve is getting buy-in from a manager or something. And that can occasionally be the case, but more often, I found that there already is a strong understanding of how valuable it would be. And it's much more common to hear things like, yeah, we would really love to do that, but we just don't have the budget or the resources right now. People want the chance to sit down with users, but they're not sure how to practically make it happen. And then because it's not a requirement in order to ship, it gets kind of continually bumped out and out in favor of more urgent tasks. And this often happens in situations where there has not been a strong history of design process, and there are very few, or maybe none at all, UX professionals on the team who can own the task. And if this is all starting to sound kind of familiar to you, then I have a recommendation. Let's do what we did and do it yourself. And in an ideal world, yes, this would be the responsibility of a UX designer, a researcher, a professional in that field. But for many teams, like the one that I was on at the time, for all sorts of various reasons, that situation just isn't a reality. So in this talk, I don't want to discuss that ideal, big budget, perfect world scenario, because there are lots of resources that already exist for that. Instead, I want to talk about how we can still make usability testing possible for startups, small companies, or maybe a personal side project that doesn't have lots of money or people or resources to dedicate to this kind of work. No matter what your situation is, I'm here to assure you running basic usability tests is something that you are completely capable of, and it's going to come with the benefit of making you a better developer as well. The first major hurdle that we need to address before we can even consider anything else is figuring out what we want to test. And no, the entire app is not an option. Usability testing is going to be most effective when it's focused on testing a specific flow, task, or feature. So take a moment to consider what kind of questions you want answered about your app. Maybe you've noticed more support tickets coming in, or maybe there's a place that you're not getting the kind of interactions or engagement that you anticipated. Have you gotten some negative feedback about a feature, or maybe you're getting ready to launch something new? All of those can be really fantastic jumping off points for usability testing. You want to choose a specific task or a chain of related tasks that will take the user through the parts of the application that you want to test. The flow should have a clear starting and ending point. The ending points don't necessarily have to be the same for every single user, but you should be able to clearly identify when the user has satisfied the task requirement. So some examples of flows like that could be onboarding, searching and saving, exporting an asset, updating the user profile. You want a task that a user can complete in one sitting, so that usually means 20 to 30 minutes. You could potentially test multiple flows in one session, but you'll still want to try and keep the entire session at no more than about an hour long, because the longer the time commitment, the harder it is to convince people to do this test for you, right? It's a really big ask. And it can be challenging to find users anyway. But it's a lot easier to ask someone for 30 minutes of their time than it is for 2 or 3 hours. There are two main types of tests that you can run. In one option, you'll watch a user move through an established flow pretty much completely unguided. The other option is to walk the user through a new flow in a kind of semi-guided, prompted way. In both situations, you'll have a chance to see the user pain points, misunderstandings, and places where your assumption as a developer diverges from the reality of the user behavior. In the established flow situation, you might say something like, "Can you walk me through your process for printing John Doe's time tracking report?" And then you sit back, observe, and let the user narrate and show the way that they complete the task without any interference. This is really fantastic for users that are already familiar with your software, that have been using it for a while. And it's interesting because it can show us the desire paths. Desire paths are user flows that a user creates for themselves when an official way of accomplishing the task has not been provided or is not convenient. And just because you didn't intend your app to be used in a certain way does not mean that a user is not finding some bizarre and creative way to make it do that thing anyway. These tests can be fantastic for revealing various loopholes and shortcuts and hacks that your users have come up with that you had no idea about. And this is incredibly valuable information. Beyond just new feature ideas, this tells you a ton about the high-level goals of your users and how they want to be able to use your app, how it fits into their existing workflow. Your app to a user is just kind of a tool in their tool belt. So if you've given them a wrench and you find that they're using it to hammer things, you just got some great insight into the kinds of problems that they're solving. The new flow situation, on the other hand, involves a little bit more back and forth. So that might sound something like, "Can you show me how you would look up flights departing from the Asheville airport on June 1st? And then they'll kind of do it, and you go, "Awesome. Now, can you talk me through your process for how you would choose a flight?" And then they'll tell you, and you go, "Amazing. Now, what would you do to book that flight?" And in that situation, you're kind of walking the user specifically through each step of the task that you want them to complete, asking questions and hearing their impressions along the way. That approach is ideal for testing new features or for working with folks that have never used your software before. It's really cool because it allows you to see your application through fresh eyes, which is so very valuable and almost impossible to do with something that you've built. Because after all, as developers, we know how it's supposed to work. We have the whole backstory, right? We were in the meeting where it was brainstormed, we scoped it, we developed it, we tested it, we know the compromises and the trade-offs that we've made, and that means we can easily become kind of nose-blind to it, right? It's really hard for us to get ourselves back into a true beginner state of mind. But thankfully, we don't actually have to. We can just talk to some true beginners and have them tell us about their experiences. Once you have an idea of what you want to test, it's time to start finding some test subjects. Most of the time, you're going to want kind of a mix of established users and people who have never seen your app before in their lives. But ultimately, that depends on what you're testing. An advanced search feature that's targeted at super users who have tons of data saved, you could probably skip new user testing for that. Whereas something like an onboarding flow, skip the established users. If you're trying to roll out a new UI theme, you probably want a mix. And of course, in the ideal scenario, you have budget to throw at this, and you get to hire someone who gives you that perfect mix of users all lined up, all ages, genders, experience levels, abilities. But in this realistic scenario, maybe you have a very limited budget or none at all. We can still do this, but it's just going to take a little bit more work. Reaching out to your sales and support folks is a really great place for finding some established users to test with, because both of those teams can quickly come up with a handful of potential candidates based on their personal interactions with your users. These tests can be organized quickly because you already have that pool to draw from, you have their demographic information, you have an established point of contact, and perhaps most importantly, you know that those users have a vested interest in your brand and in the improvement of your app. So it's a really good place to start, but you won't want to stop there. To cast a wider net with your established users, try posting open calls on social media, adding banners or modals to your website. Often it can help to kind of like sweeten the pot here by offering them something in exchange, although that doesn't have to be money. It can be, but also things like free trials or discounted rates, company swag, all of that can be really powerful motivators without necessarily needing to cut a check. And besides, you probably have some closet full of t-shirts and stickers you've been meaning to clear out anyway, right? This is a great opportunity to shift some of that. New users can be more challenging because they will absolutely require motivation to participate in something that they otherwise don't have any investment in. Those free options can still work here, the swag, the discounted rates, so definitely give that a shot. Friends and family members are often good options here too. You just have to kind of try and create a level of separation between yourself and them to make sure that you're not the one that's running a test for your mom. You can see where that might create some biased results. If you have a small budget, something like small gift cards, $10 or $20 gift cards, or like a free catered lunch can do a lot to entice participants. So even if you can manage $100, you can still get a handful of folks that will be willing to do a quick usability test for you. If you have a moderate budget, investing in a third-party service like a panel agency or a market research recruiter can be super valuable. Those folks will help you connect with specific subsets of your user types, so you'll get better and more accurate results when you're testing. If that's not an option, you can still definitely try to connect with those user groups on your own by reaching out to community centers or organizations that cater to those groups. And a gift of volunteer hours or public promotion can also help there as well without needing to spend money. Promoted posts and ads on social media sites are also pretty reasonable in terms of cost and will allow you to set very specific targeting parameters and help you reach specific demographics that you might otherwise struggle to reach. Ultimately, you want to try and achieve as diverse a group as possible, so consider age, race, gender, disability, orientation, identity, and experience level as you're gathering users. But also, remember that perfect can kind of be the enemy of good here, and any user testing is going to be better than none. When you're working with limited resources, the ideal might not be possible yet. It's important to focus on the long-term goal, which here is to establish a valuable usability testing program that shows results, so that more money, time, and resources can be allocated to it down the road when they become available. This is really just step one. When your testing group isn't diverse, you do have to take the results with a bit of a grain of salt, and remember that they might not be fully reflective of the community. The data can still be useful, the conversations can still be hugely informative, and the process is still absolutely worth doing. The results just shouldn't be held up as the absolute single objective truth. When you're reaching out to gauge interest and get potential candidates for testing, that's when it's time to start nailing down the logistics of the test itself. And this is the part where folks often get hung up, because because there's a lot of details you might not have considered if you'd never done this before. So let's break it down. Ideally, you will need at least 2 people to run the tests. They don't need to have ever done this before. You just need someone who can be polite and who's comfortable speaking with users. It's best to have multiple testers so that the workload of proctoring the tests can be divided, but that's, again, kind of ideal. It just helps speed up the work. In addition to the person who's actually proctoring the test, you also want a second silent observer who can be present during the testing. This person's not going to participate beyond just watching and taking notes, but that allows the proctor to focus entirely on the user. If you're able to take a video or a screen recording, you might be able to skip that, but it's still just really nice to have a second person there that you can kind of break the session down afterwards, talk about it with, compare impressions. If you do choose to record the session, that could be as simple and cheap as a microphone and a webcam in the testing room, which is probably equipment that you already have. Or you could look at more complex options like heat map or cursor tracking software installed on the testing machine. And again, a lot of this kind of comes down to budget. Is the extra data that you can get with those additional recording methods worth the investment? You can absolutely hold useful usability testing sessions with no recording equipment at all. So again, don't let it be a blocker. These are just extra tools you could use to make your life a little bit easier for each session. No matter what you choose, any recording methods will need to be disclosed to the user before the session, and their acknowledgement and agreement needs to be gained before you can begin the test. You'll also need to consider how the test is being administered, whether that's in person or remotely. And both have pros and cons, so there's not necessarily a right answer. An in-person test has the benefit of allowing closer observation of the user, and that allows you to pick up on things like body language or facial expressions that might get lost on camera. It can also feel a little bit more conversational, and that helps put the user at ease. And an at-ease test subject is going to be more talkative. You'll probably get a little bit more information from them. Testing in person also has the benefit of allowing you to provide the computer or the device for testing, which is going to give you a little bit more control and help eliminate some of the variables of personal user device configurations. On the flip side, it does mean that you need an actual physical space to test in, and if your team works remotely or your office isn't nearby or easily accessible, that can be a challenge. You could possibly reserve a meeting room at your local library or at a co-working space. Both of those tend to be affordable, if not free. In-person testing, though, also means that your users might not have access to their usual assistive devices, so that could limit your accessibility testing. A remote test, on the other hand, has the obvious benefit of flexibility. That allows you to reach more users at more times that are convenient to them, which can help you find more people to test with. It also gives you the benefit of testing in the environment where the user is most likely to be when they're using your software for real, and on the device that they'll be using in that real-world situation. However, as I'm sure we've all learned over the last few years, remote work can come with communication and technology challenges. It can sometimes be more difficult to get permission from users to record if you're trying to contact them on a work-supplied device or in their corporate office. And if your feature has not launched to the general public yet, then you'll need to figure out the technical aspect of getting the user access on their personal device. Regardless of which approach you choose, some logistics are universal. If you're going to run tests that happen during standard work hours, remember that, again, that's a big ask to make users take time away from their job and possibly commute to you in the middle of their workday. If you're running tests outside of standard work hours, you might need to consider the need for childcare. All of these choices could unintentionally bias your results if you're not taking them into account. Like when you run tests during the workday at a location that's not easily accessible via public transit, then you've restricted your testing pool to only people who have cars and can easily take time off. If you're bringing users into your office and you're running tests on a desktop computer with a huge screen and a really fast internet connection, you might not get accurate data for an app that's going to get used on tablets over like a weaker Wi-Fi connection. So think about the goals of your test, how your app is going to be used, and choose a configuration that's going to make the most sense for your needs. After all that, it is finally time to run the test. This part is actually kind of the easy part. I like to write up a loose outline so that I have something to reference as we're testing, and I make sure that I don't forget anything. You'll start by introducing yourself. You'll thank the user for their time. If you're going to offer them any kind of gift or compensation, just give them a quick explanation of when that will be distributed. So, you'll get the t-shirt on your way out, or we'll email you the code for your free subscription. Then you're going to talk them through the goal of the testing. So today we're going to test a new feature in the app, or today you're going to look at a new piece of software that you've never seen before. It's crucial to assure the user this is not testing their personal ability in any way. The only thing being tested is the software itself. Emphasize that you want their honest feedback, even or especially when it's negative, and reassure them that they're not going to hurt anyone's feelings or make anyone upset. Finally, let them know you won't be able to help or guide them while they're completing the tasks, and that even if they ask, you kind of can't tell them the right answer, which seems a little mean, but it's important for you to see how they would solve problems without guidance. Then ask them to think out loud as much as possible while completing the test. Give examples like, okay, right now I'm looking for the search bar, and okay, yep, there it is. Now I'm going to type in the name of my teammate. And that kind of thing feels really silly. It feels awkward at first. People don't like it. That's okay. Tell them that it's going to get a little more natural as they go, and reassure them that it is very important. Finally, open the door to any questions from them. Take as long as needed here to make sure that they feel completely comfortable before you move on. This is also the time to ask for permission if you need it for things like recordings, get any verbal or written consent. Once that's all good and you hit that record button and start the test, begin with some basic identifying questions that will be able to give you context on this data later when you're looking at it afterwards. So things like the user's name, their age, how long they've been using this software, how long they've been in this industry. Consider what aspects might influence the data that you collect, and as long as it's not too invasive or personal, ask away. When it comes to the test itself, tell the user clearly and simply what you want them to do. When they get stuck or hung up, which is almost inevitable, try to ask open-ended questions to help move things along. Don't guide them towards a specific answer, don't give them hints, just kind of give them prompts to help get them thinking again. So for example, what are you looking for on the page right now? If they do ask directly for your help, tell them to imagine that they're at home or at work on their own, and ask them what they would do in that situation without someone to ask. If it really does get to the point where they just give up, and they're like, I don't know, I would call support, or I'd file a ticket. If the test comes to a complete standstill, you can prompt them in the right direction, or go ahead and move to the next prompt. But you don't want them to feel like they can turn to you for the answer the moment they start to feel adrift, because seeing how they kind of process the assumptions that they make as they're working through a problem, that's all going to be really valuable data for you. A little bit of silence is okay, but if it goes on for a long time, again, kind of prompt them to think out loud. Something as simple as like, what are you working on, or what are you trying to find here, will usually do the trick. And if a user expresses surprise or disbelief or frustration, one of the most useful ways you can respond is to ask, so what were you expecting to happen here? That will tell you about their assumptions and the ways that they've been conditioned to use this kind of software, which can be invaluable. Once the task has been completed, ask any follow-up questions that you might have. This is a great opportunity to kind of widen your focus to more high-level stuff. So general impressions, feelings, emotions while using the software. It's also a chance to get them to share any kind of thoughts or feelings that you might not have thought to ask them about specifically. So offering them an open-ended prompt like, beyond what we've discussed, did you have any observations you wanted to share? And then, of course, feel free to drill down on any of their answers, ask follow-up questions to make sure you get the data that you need. A question I really like here is called the magic wand question. So if you had a magic wand, you could change any part of what you just experienced. What would it be? That's interesting because you get a wide range of results. You tend to get those kind of like, well, it would be really nice if I could do X, Y, Z. Sometimes you get comparisons to other apps, which is useful, like, well, Amazon can do this, so I thought that your e-commerce platform would, which is frustrating when you hear it, but valuable in the long run. Sometimes those things are wild cards, they're things you could or would never do, but sometimes they're really cool stuff that you just wouldn't have thought of, so it's always worth asking. Then check to see if the user has any questions. If you're showing them something new, almost always you could put money on the fact that they're going to ask, when will this be available? So make sure that you have a good answer for that. Don't make promises you can't keep. It's also totally okay to say, we don't know yet, but we will absolutely keep you posted. Once you're done, you have all the information you need. Thank the user again genuinely for their time, and end the session. Of course, once you've finished conducting the tests, you're not actually done, right? You've got all this raw data, but for it to be useful, you're going to need to review it and start to form some conclusions. It can be hard to know what to do with all of it, since a lot of usability testing data is observational. It's not necessarily easy to just throw it into a spreadsheet and look at a sum, right? So here's the approach that I like to take. First, group by question or task. You asked all of the users the same basic set of questions. You asked them to perform the same basic task. So it's a really good way to start dividing out the data into parsable chunks. Start compiling the notes for each user as organized by question or task. Then start to look for patterns. This is where you can kind of start to put the puzzle together. When multiple users are taking the same action, when multiple users are struggling in the same place, whether it's good or bad, seeing multiple people follow the same flow without speaking to each other is a really strong indication of how your user interface is being interpreted. So if they're all fumbling, they're all making mistakes, even if they're making different mistakes, but at the same point, that's a red flag. Then you're going to want to try and collect the hard data. And just because you don't have a ton of that, doesn't mean you don't have any. So you have things like time to complete tasks, number of clicks. Maybe you have heat map data. Maybe you have eye tracking data. See what those numbers have to say in correlation with the experiences that you witnessed. Finally, collect things like noteworthy quotes or findings, things that stood out to you. All that data that you've put together, collect into a one-page document. Because other folks are going to want to see the results of the tests, but they're not going to want to read every page of notes that you have about every single user. So find the most impactful stuff, put it into a document for quick review and access. My main tip here is to not let one user's struggle or success overshadow the others. Don't rush to change things because one person didn't understand it, and don't refuse to change things because one person managed to do it well. It's really easy to start looking for the users and the tests that confirm our own biases. But that's not actually helpful when it comes to building better software. True objectivity is hard, which is why it's ideal to involve as many different people in the testing process as possible, so multiple interpretations of the data and the experiences can be heard. Not too scary, right? Like, it's got lots of parts, but they're all things that can be broken down into smaller achievable steps, and it's totally something that you can do. In fact, it is so doable, and it's so approachable, we're going to do it right now. I have already talked to Volunteer, my lovely co-host Alyssa, into being our user, and she's going to come up and do a little bit of live usability testing with us to look at the layout and architecture of this site. She's only seen this site once or twice, and every time I give her brand new prompts.
I want to state it wouldn't matter. I'm a goldfish, so I don't remember the original prompts nor the website. So
give me just a minute to switch the
I think it's my superpower, but it's also a curse.
We're going to mirror the displays real quick. And there you go. The mouse is connected if you prefer to use that. So, welcome. Thank you so much for coming to Usability Test with us today. My name is Kathryn.
Good to meet you, Alyssa.
Wonderful. So, what we're going to do today is walk through a website and see kind of how that works for you. I'm going to ask you some questions. I'm going to ask you to perform some tasks. But I want to reassure you that we're not testing your ability to navigate this website. We're really testing the layout and the design of the website itself. So nothing here is going to reflect on you. It's going to reflect on our team. And let me tell you, there is nothing you can do to hurt our feelings. Anything that you can say to me is not going to be meaner than what my professors in college said.
Yeah, I've been there.
So I promise, please be as honest as possible.
Okay, I will
So,
try.
wonderful. Do I have your permission to record this session, by the way?
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So let's go ahead and get into it. First, can you tell me how long you have been a software engineer?
2013, since then.
Awesome. And what's your job title?
I am a senior developer advocate right now.
That's exciting. Do you like that work?
Oh, I love it. I honestly love the fact that I got to merge writing code with like being in the community. So it's my ideal job.
Yeah, no, me too. Fantastic. Okay, let's go ahead and get into some of the tasks.
Okay.
I was curious if you could find for me the Figma UI kits.
Okay, so first thought is reading the nav bar, app bar, I never know what people call these, foundation, theme, CSS utilities, components, resources, and you said Figma kits. So then I'm like, oh no, your scroll is backwards. I forget every time.
My scroll is the right way around, and
She
Apple
scrolls
changed it a
the
few years
opposite
ago,
direction.
and that's not my fault.
Okay, all right, I can do this. I can make it go the other way. All right, so I'm looking for Figma kits.
You can also use the mouse, if that would be easier.
Does it scroll the right way? It does. Sorry. Figma kits. Okay, components, chips, customization, theme builder, resources, nothing in the footer. So now I'm going to do Command F and say Figma. Hey, I was so close. But wait, is that clickable? Oh, crap. No, it's not clickable, and I'm lost. Okay, wait. Figma kits are designy things that designers use. This whole site is, oh, the backward scroll. Foundation, theme, CSS, utilities, components, resources, maybe? Now can I Command F? Figma? Oh, it's right over there. There's a sidebar. Did I do it?
Yeah, you got it. Thank you so much. Okay.
That's the saddest applause I've ever gotten.
Oh, man. Okay, I have one more task for you.
Oh, gosh, okay.
So can you bring us back to the homepage? And then I'd love for you to look up the component anatomy of the dropdown.
The component anatomy of the dropdown. My first thought is I remember seeing components in the header, or the navigation, of the dropdown. Now I'm looking over here, A, B, C, D, backward scrolling, drop-down button? Wait.
Drop-down list.
List, okay.
That's on me.
Wait, did I do it yet? No. Anatomy, styles, globalization, accessibilities, live demo. Looking for something, is this, I want to do Angular. Can we do Angular? Should I not have navigated? Am I breaking your whole demo? Sorry, she wants me to think out loud. It might not be pretty.
You're doing a fantastic job.
Okay, cool. View source. I love Angular. Sorry if that offends you. Drop down. Is that anatomy enough, or you want more chunks? Oh, was that wrong?
That's not quite what I was looking for,
Oh, no.
but it's still useful. So
Okay.
if you were coding, is that what you would be looking for when you were looking to understand the anatomy of this component?
Yeah, so usually I'm like, okay, I need to see how I implement this component, right? So first I'm like, okay, Kendo, drop-down list, got it, getting the syntax down. Then I might be like, I need the full API, so maybe there's like an API reference list, or if I, let's see, overview, drop-down list. I wonder if I scroll, oh God, reverse. Key features, support and learning. Maybe if I Command F for, what were we looking for? I don't know what I was looking for. I do this often. The drop.
Anatomy.
Anatomy. Oh, API, that's what I was looking for. I was looking for reference, that one. So this is like more anatomy, right? Because it's got actual like bits and bobs of the component. Because you're like, look, I can do these things. Is that what you were talking about?
It wasn't, but that's also okay.
Okay.
Because that gives me a little bit of insight into what you would be looking for. The thing that I was kind of looking for is that there is...
Oh, there's an actual, you're not talking about like the code anatomy.
No, but that's okay.
The design anatomy. Okay, it's on the website. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
this was really useful. No, I'm being quite serious. And I really want to thank you for your time today.
Awesome, thank you so much.
So. So even just looking at that, right? from that maybe 5 minutes of very casual testing, there are things that I learned, right? That maybe our use of the word anatomy is not useful. Maybe that's not the descriptive word that most people are going to be seeing. We also saw a situation where personal user device configurations impacted the user's ability to navigate, right? That the fact that I like to have my scroll in the opposite direction that Alyssa does impeded testing and changed things. So that might be changing the results. And if she was allowed to test on her own machine, maybe that would have been more beneficial. Was there anything that you guys noticed or anything that you learned from that test? If you had been the developer that created that website, what might you have taken away?
I'm gonna walk around. So raise your hand because we would love to get live comments on how badly I did. I'm kidding. Can you pass this down for me?
We are not testing a person's ability, we're testing the website.
So what I would have taken away from this is that people don't usually look at the right and left to see if there is something there. They usually look at the top nav bar, but if there is also left and right, then don't usually see both of them.
Yeah, so maybe where we've positioned things could be better.
Hi. So I thought that Alyssa went to an outside source following a link. So I would move the outside links to the bottom of my page.
Nope, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Any more?
There's one in the back, Alyssa.
Aha.
Hi. So what I noticed is that because she mentioned that she's a developer, she started immediately looking for the source code.
Yep.
So the person's background is going to influence their way around the app. She was also using Control F a lot, which not a lot of people do, but I assume that because we're a lot of us are developers, we are kind of used to that workflow, and that's not something that I would have thought of when I was designing a website.
Yeah, so thinking about who your audience is and how that might change the way that they interact with the site, the patterns that they reach for, whether you have quote-unquote super users or not, all of those things. Go ahead, so sorry.
I noticed that the Figma kit text could have been a link, and it would have been easier for her to find the Figma kit.
Yep. All right. We're getting close to the end of time, so I want to thank you guys so much for participating, for offering some insights. I hope this gave you a little bit of confidence and the ability to think like, yeah, you know what, I could do that. And even with as little kind of preparation and as much as I kind of winged it there, we still took away, I'd say, 5 or 6 really important learnings that could be applied to the website here and would probably improve it. And the more people we tested with, we would start to see if there were patterns. For example, if multiple people did that Command F to start searching, then maybe we need to really prioritize our keywords. And we need to start thinking about how we're organizing the page and what language we're using. So there are things that we can take away. There are things we can do, even with minimal budget or experience. This is still something completely accessible and possible for each one of you. And the more tests you run, the more you interface with users, the more you start to learn how they think, what they're looking for, and what you can do to more accurately cater what you're building to what they need. So thank you guys so much for your time. I really appreciate it.